If you look at Middle East and North African countries that have had an unemployment rate of around 15%, and at that level, they had civil unrest. Those economies becomes difficult to invest in. So the social aspect, which is unemployment, makes those countries difficult to invest in. Remember, at the end of the day, all businesses are given the right to operate in any economy by the citizens in that economy. And if the citizens are not gelling well in a socially stable environment, it becomes difficult for you to actually deploy capital in those economies. So social stability matters, first and foremost, for any business. So that's why we have to look at social and human development. But again, if you look at some of the economies globally, even here, we can take Rwanda, for instance. The improvement in the social aspects produces a stable operating environment, but it is also the genesis of skills which are required by investors. So that skills, ability for an economy to produce good skills is captured in the social aspect of the indicators. So they are important. You can have a mass market Nigeria, you can have high income per capita. As long as the social aspect is not there, it becomes difficult to operate. That's why we took it explicitly into the rankings.
I love the point that Azai makes about having social license to operate. It is the society that gives you the ability to operate. Sitting behind this work is a really important bureau of literature, evidence on market access, market entry, the performance of companies in country. And this social dimension is an absolutely critical component. Perhaps to put it in a slightly different way, if your business is doing well but society is stumbling and stuttering, you're actually running an extractive enterprise. And you'll run out of runway in the fullness of time. So this dimension that the social human capital development component brings, I think, is an absolutely fundamental lens to think about the performance and the longevity of your business in country.
Could I add to that? I think when you're looking at social and human development, you're looking at broader ESG, sustainable goals. A lot of countries are now financing themselves through some of this. So you get things like social impact bonds and development impact bonds. So I think it starts to play a more important role as we go forward.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people in this room would think, well, if your team was based in Seychelles, or if you were told tomorrow that you can work from Seychelles or Mauritius, a lot of people will be like, that sounds like a really nice idea. I mean, the beautiful countries. But let's talk about some of the practicalities, Samantha, of investing in small markets or small economies like Seychelles and Mauritius. What is there to bear in mind when you look at that?
So I think when you're looking at it, maybe you can look at something more sector specific. So obviously, in relation to Seychelles and Mauritius, apart from wanting to have offices there, I think you'd look at the tourism sector, which would be one. There's also growing IT, IT and innovation in both those economies. You get a country or island like Seychelles that has this huge blueprint for a blue economy, and you look at maybe the prospects of Seychelles in that regard. So using,
Take me through what has happened between 2021 and now. And yes, you did mention you've added all these other metrics in place, but what has happened in some of these economies where investors may have thought, I like Rwanda, I like the idea of being in Kenya, etc.?
If you look in terms of the change in methodology, which is quite important from a data perspective, but also to provide granular understanding of the countries, that really drives the change in terms of the rankings. But it is also why we also took an opportunity to back test to 2023 scores so that we can compare with this year's scores. And what you have seen is the scores are quite stable. There is change still as some of the variables change, they can influence the overall rankings, but that change is not drastic. But secondly, this, we believe, it's a better way to look at economies. Previously, in the previous methodology, it was dominated to a large extent by the size of the economy. That would always dominate. Hence, you saw the likes of Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa. But that is not the only determinant of investment attractiveness. You can have a large market, but if it's difficult to take money in and out of that market, it becomes difficult for a financial institution. But if you are a pharmaceutical company that is not so worried about the ability to extract money quickly in and out, then you are better served in having 180 million people that are buying medicine every day. So all this says is this gives us a better view to understand economies. But what we need to do is to look at what really drives our underlying businesses and look at the countries that are classified, or at least that are driven by those underlying characteristics. So this becomes quite important. So for instance, if you want the ability to easily export to multiple countries, then you are better off being based in a global connector, for instance, because they have well-diversified sectors, they have much more linkages with other countries globally. It becomes much more easy for you to base your operations in that country, but you still produce for the rest of the world. So it's those dynamics that come through from this methodology that were not there in the previous methodology.
Okay.
So first, where it fits is it belongs in the economic performance and potential, because infrastructure, all considered, is one of the single most important drivers, pun intended, of sustained economic growth. And where you find economies that have elevated rates of gross domestic fixed investment, that translates almost automatically, by definition, into elevated and sustained growth. Now, some of the leaders in terms of that infrastructure development put their hands up quickly. Ethiopia has made big advances. Tanzania has made big advances. Zambia is making gains. So that's a first consideration. Keep in mind, though, it is only one dimension. And I think, if I'd like to just come back to this point if we have a moment. But keep in mind that that's only one dimension. But just to give you a sense of the extent of the opportunity or the size of the deficit, depending on whether you want to be half full or half empty in your perspective. The Economist in the last week's edition produces an absolutely staggering statistic that if Africa is to develop rail infrastructure with the network sophistication or density of India or China, Africa needs to make an investment of $100 billion per annum. Now, that is an extraordinary number. And to try and get a gasp from the room, how much has been invested over the last decade? $6 billion. So there is a massive, massive infrastructure deficit. This is off the charts. There isn't a Z-score big enough to do this. But it also helps really underline the point that Isaiah was making about Africa is not a country. Africa is not a place. And you have to consider these countries on a case-by-case basis. And we can quickly find the economies that put their hands up in terms of making big strides and advances in infrastructure.
Okay.
Perhaps let me add, as much as infrastructure is on the economic and performance and potential pillar, it can also be on the social and human development. If you consider
absolutely, yeah,
clinics, schools, that contributes into human development.
Yeah.
So if you are an impact investor that cares about education, therein you can invest in social infrastructure that can produce the skills the continent requires.
And human mobility.
Yeah.
That infrastructure and mobility can be virtual as well as physical. That I've got the ability to jump into transport and move from one city to the other. Or move from peri-urban to urban, And it might also be virtual. I know that we've got a bunch of people online this morning. That's virtual connectedness. So infrastructure brings all of these dimensions in terms of critical network industries.